Hi, I'm Russell Cameron Thomas.
Today's walking meditation is on the subject of death and rebirth. And I'm here at the Piedmont Cemetery in California because I thought this would be a good location. I've come to this place many times for inner work and processing. I don't have any personal connections to people buried here, but in a way, I have a connection to everybody. We all pass at some point. Now, I'm at the upper part of the cemetery, the crest of the hill, where all the largest monuments are. So this is a walking meditation for the audio part, but most of the video that you're going to watch is in my loft studio where I'm restoring a painting. And this painting is a crucifixion scene titled "Death is Swallowed Up in Victory." It's a quotation out of 1 Corinthians from the Bible, and also a movement, an aria within Handel's Messiah. So I started this painting when I was in college in the late 70s. I think I finished it, or at least I worked on most of it, the first phase, during 1978-79. And then I put it aside because there were some artistic challenges that I was not able to solve at the time with my skills. And there was also something energetic and maybe spiritual that I wasn't able to resolve. So I'm going to talk about this painting, and you'll see it as I go through the restoration process. But I want to emphasize here that this theme of death and rebirth features in many, if not most cultures, many, if not most religions. It's also related to metamorphosis, caterpillars turning into butterflies, tadpoles turning into frogs, snakes shedding their skin, and of course, Phoenix rising from the ashes. So I painted this at a time when, as a young person, I was going through a lot of inquiry around philosophy and spirituality. I was raised Protestant Christian, but at the time I was not aligned with Christianity. But I was definitely open to what lessons could be learned from it. And the motif of the painting, we have a figure of a man, in this case Jesus on the cross, the very figure of mortality and human limitations, the end of mortality, the end of mortal life. And then this otherworldly, superhuman energy rising above, encasing the human figure in a shaft of light or shaft of energy, but in this muscular, arms outstretched, V for victory posture. So this motif had been with me for a couple years, and then it came back to me when I was considering what could be learned from Christianity and various aspects of it, including crucifixion and resurrection. So what struck me at the time was the intrinsic paradox of crucifixion, death and rebirth. Here is, in the eyes of the authority and in the eyes of society, the ultimate defeat, the ultimate obliteration of the guilty party. And Yet out of this arose this great triumph or victory, which, if you're a Christian, you think is the resurrection. Jesus dying for everyone's sins, all the sins of humanity, the Lamb of God being sacrificed, the last sacrifice necessary, the Temple of Jerusalem. But institutionally and historically, the Orthodox view, the Catholic view of Christianity became centered on this defeat, this death of Christ on the cross. And it gave rise to one of the three dominant religions in all world history. So socially and institutionally, I'd say that represents a victory. Those who were trying to obliterate Jesus and the Jesus movement had the opposite effect. So I was really interested in that paradox, and the phrase "death is swallowed up in victory" is intended to point to that paradox. So in this walking meditation, I'm going to talk some about what comes up for me. This is not intended to be preaching to anybody. You're allowed to have your own beliefs and your own conclusions, but maybe you'll find this interesting. Now, I'll just say, here's some more context for what's going on with this video. I've got a very close friend and advisor who is going through surgery for breast cancer. She's having a double mastectomy and reconstructive surgery. And it's not something I've ever experienced, but I've had friends and I know of people who've gone through that, and it's a really monumental thing to go through. Anytime that you have to have parts of your body removed that you have some identity with and some connection to. And my friend went through a beautiful process about being fully present. And this is what I want to emphasize: fully present with all the emotions and all the ramifications and all the possibilities of this death and release. Now, she happened to be, in her career, a medical doctor, OB/GYN, and had performed many surgeries, but she still had to go through it, not as an external observer or professional, but as the subject of this process. And a key feature of the process is you can't be in control of everything. In fact, if you try to hold on to control, that very act of trying to control may bring on the thing which you fear most, and loss of control. I want to bring in another touchstone for me, which was this last Easter weekend. I went on a meditation retreat at a Catholic seminary called the Mercy Center in Burlingame. This was a Buddhist meditation with Christian themes, Christian connections, so call it an interfaith meditation retreat, but the primary modality was Zen Buddhist meditation. But it being over the 3 days of Easter, the spiritual director invoked stories and messages from the Passion of the Christ through the 3 days, each day of the meditation retreat. This gave us the chance to breathe in and be present with and deeply tune to the deeper dynamics of this event, archetypal rite of passage, and how this archetypal rite of passage can play out in each of our lives, each and every human being, not only in the physical realm, death of your body, death of your parents, death of your friends, death of your life partner, but relationally, ending of friendships, leaving the house that you grew up in, leaving the town that you grew up in, leaving the friends that you grew up with, leaving the job or career that you dedicated your life to as you transitioned into something new or into retirement. But deeper still, each one of us carry layers of identity, layers of belief, layers of habits that serve us in a way, serve us for a while, but they too have their time of passing, where they're no longer of service, where the burden of them exceeds the benefits that they're providing. And for us to grow as beings, as spirits, as souls, we need to shed them. The death and rebirth process, it's symbolized by this painting, is intended to invoke in the viewer, it's intended to invite the viewer into the deep recesses of letting go, releasing the grip on these identities, these attachments, these behavior patterns, these things that we believe are central to who we are, but in fact are not. And then we have to go through this period of radical uncertainty where we don't know what's going to happen next, and a whole universe of possibilities open up, including the most frightful and dreadful possibilities. And then out the other side, if we're able to be through the process, comes a rebirth. And the key thing is, we can't know ahead of time what that rebirth is. Because if you know ahead of time what it is, and you try to control it and navigate toward it, you're not actually doing it. That gripping and controlling of the process and in the outcome keeps you bound to this identity or this pattern which needs to go. I have been looking for a home for this painting since the early 90s, at least. Now, I forgot to mention, it took me 8 years of gestation and growth and insight to solve both the artistic challenge, but also the inner spiritual challenge of how to complete this painting. So the painting was actually completed in 1987 when I was living in California, even though it was started, got about halfway done in the late 70s, about 1979. So this painting and its themes have been on a long journey. And I have a lot of people in my life who are Christians. I'm born-again Christian. A couple of people who are Catholic. And was not able to find anybody who would want to give it a home. And I acknowledge this is not an easy picture to be with. It's not a pretty picture to hang over your couch to match your decor. This is a challenging painting. Okay, now I want to share some insights that I've developed along the way, creating this painting, living with it, seeking to find a home for it, and finally now restoring it so that it can be in full glory, this new home. So let's first talk about death of identity, or death of persona or patterns. In the Buddhist philosophy, and actually in many other philosophies, the key recognition is we humans suffer because we develop attachments to who we think we are. So you could call these ego attachments, but it's really more than ego attachment. People cling vigorously onto this notion of this is me. If I lose this, I will be obliterated. I will be gone. And that's the worst thing in the world. I'm not going to spend a lot of time enumerating all the ways this shows up. But in my own life, it shows up in certain behavior patterns, in certain comfort zones, and ways of viewing myself, and ways of positioning myself with other people. And a lot of it's unconscious, but it all has the flavor of this is who I am. This is who I am. The question is, what happens when this I, this who I am, goes away, is lost, is killed, dies, is obliterated? The grasping part of us freaks out. Worst thing in the world. The crime of Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, as he was referred in the proceedings. He was tried in two places. First, the Jewish authorities, the Sadducees and Pharisees. Second, in front of the Roman authorities in the form of Pontius Pilate. So there were a range of charges, including blasphemy and apparently sorcery and curing people on the Sabbath, and essentially violations of the laws of Deuteronomy and Leviticus. And the key crime of blasphemy was him proclaiming himself as the Messiah. Jesus' response to all this, he did not put on a full-throated defense. He did not defend himself to exonerate himself and to preserve his identity either as a rabbi, teacher, or as Messiah, or anything in between. The answers he gave had some ambiguity to them. Put the onus back onto his accusers to interpret and essentially arrive at his guilt. But here's the key thing. He was on trial and eventually crucified for an identity which true believing Christians believe is true for him. That he is the Messiah. He was the Messiah. So the crime in front of the Romans was essentially a crime of insurrection, proclaiming himself to be king of the Jews. And he wasn't so much found guilty as he was found to be a bother. I wash my hands of this man, I think is what Pontius Pilate said. So it was easier for the officials to let the conviction and crucifixion go through than to actually declare conclusively one way or another whether he was in fact King of the Jews, whether he was in fact an insurrectionist. But Jesus did not resist any of this. Essentially, the prayers in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before the arrest, after the Last Supper, was him knowing enough about what was going to happen that he fully walked into it, undefended, no resistance, no prevarication, no yeah buts, no excuses. And things got progressively more painful. And I think he knew they were going to get progressively more painful. Another key part of this dynamic of death and rebirth is being fully present and fully experience all the emotions, all the bodily experiences, the mental understanding of what's happening to you. There's a piece of music in The Messiah where the lyrics are, he was despised, he was rejected, he was abandoned. And this is, of course, him carrying the cross, dragging the cross up to the site of crucifixion and being spat upon and jeered along the way. Many, many insults and pains and injuries he had to accept, absorb, and fully experience from start to finish. From the original arrest, the betrayal of Judas, the betrayal of one of your closest friends and confidants can be as painful or worse than any physical injury. According to the Gospels, at no point did he try to protect himself or use supernatural powers or abilities to mitigate any of these wounds, any of these harms, any of these pains. He felt it in his head, in his intellect, he knew what was going on. He knew he had fallen to the lowest of society, where anyone and everyone could look down upon him and reject him. In fact, the whole rituals of society called for that. That's the whole point of such a gruesome public execution. The crown of thorns and the humiliation and the stinging pain of that didn't tear it off, didn't try to mitigate it, just fully absorbed it. Now, there's a key dynamic here where my view may differ from a lot of card-carrying Christians. And I asked the spiritual director this: did Jesus know everything that was going to happen? Did he know everything that was going to unfold in the crucifixion, in the burial, in the tomb afterward, in the resurrection? She wasn't sure. She didn't know. I think the answer is he did not know. I think not knowing, what I'll call radical uncertainty, is essential to the process. Now, I know it comforts a lot of people to believe that some all-knowing being is in complete control of everything, and there is no randomness, and everything is done with the good of the plan in mind. I don't hold that view. I believe in the essential necessity of radical uncertainty. the inability to calculate the odds, the coming apart of all the chains of cause and effect and logic that would have us know how things are going to unfold, or even guess how things are going to unfold. According to at least some of the Gospels, on the cross, he calls out, "My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Pretty powerful in the midst of all this, and supports the proposition that Jesus did not know what was going to happen, and he had to cope with the unfolding of events and the awfulness, and he had to go through that point, that period of all was lost. "Why hast thou forsaken me?" is the last cry, the last plea for help from the one resource that his identity was holding on to as a rescue. I'm going to endure all this, but somehow God the Father is going to save me out of this. I only have to endure so far. I don't have to let this go completely. I'm going to make it through because God the Father is going to save me. But no, at that moment, he had to completely let go. In the painting, I tried to paint the dying Jesus as barely more than a skeleton, completely drained of life, to represent the complete death, the complete obliteration, complete release of the living Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus, Son of Man, who was leader of apostles, building a community, healing people, a force of reform within the Jewish community. All that was gone now, and he had to release all of it. Now, at this year's meditation retreat on Saturday, I think that was one of the most interesting and fruitful days of meditation and contemplation, because the spiritual director, her talk was about the experiences of Jesus in the tomb. Not to get too caught up in the details of how it's reported in the Gospels. The report is he descended into the earth, he descended into hell, he contended with demons or some such. Here's what I take out of that. This was his release into radical uncertainty. I am completely releasing control. I am completely falling into this maelstrom of possibilities. Every imaginable good possibility, every imaginable bad possibility, and an infinite number of possibilities that nobody's ever imagined. Now, let me switch contexts. Can you think of a time in your life when you truly didn't know what was going to happen next? You truly didn't know what direction to go to. Maybe it was a project. Maybe it was a relationship. Maybe it was a work of art. Maybe it was your career. Maybe it was your life purpose. So there's a way of encountering that situation called grasping or gripping or clutching energy that wants to grip down on it and reduce things to like a simple yes or no. Am I going to do this or not? Is it going to be A or B? And often it's like a matter spinning into a black hole, and you spin round and round, faster and faster, and get more and more frantic, and then desperately lunge at a decision or grasp at a decision or impulsively make a decision that then almost inevitably falls apart or almost inevitably comes undone because it has falseness. It isn't grown organically. Anybody who's given birth to a child in a high-risk circumstance probably knows this experience. You don't know how the baby's going to turn out. You don't know if everything's going to be okay. And it can be almost unbearable to live with all those possibilities, especially if negative signs start showing up. Our minds spin out of control. So I'm sharing all this because it's one of the hardest things humans can ever do. Sit in the middle of radical uncertainty with any kind of openness, equanimity, meaning I'm okay with all of this. I'm not frantic about all of this. I can let this be what it is. I can even connect with it. I don't know if I have a part of the painting that necessarily represents this radical uncertainty. I think the best I can do is point to the atmospherics and the swirling of the clouds and vapors around the rising spirit. Obviously, that's inspired by Van Gogh's Starry Night. And I think you'll notice the composition is not fully three-dimensional. It's sort of closer to medieval painting style, which has a flatness to it and a very strongly symbolic structure. The earth is barren and lifeless and murky brown. Two crosses of men, criminals who were crucified along with Jesus, are hazy sketches, barely recognizable in the glow. That's meant to represent, again, this utter death and release of this human form, this identity, this pattern. This is who I am, or this is who I thought I was. There's nothing there to sustain it anymore. And then the atmosphere is the swirling of possibilities and of action, reaction, and none of the clouds look real, at least not the swirling ones, the ones at the top do. And they sort of hearken to special effects used in movies where swirling spirits moving through space leave trails, and it's basically a space so vast and so powerful, it's beyond the scope of anyone's control and really anyone's understanding. And for the most part, if you're in that space, the best you can do is release into it. The worst you can do is fight it or try to control it. So the rebirth, the resurrection. Once the old self dies, once the old self is released, the old skin is peeled off. The caterpillar essence has been shed and butterfly essence comes forward. It's illuminated by a light from within. It has its own life force. It's a release of life force, but it's not a life force that is given from the outside or generated from the old. In the painting, this life force shines as a shaft of light on the dead crucified body of Jesus. In other words, it's standing fully in the presence of. It's not somewhere else. It's not disowning. It's not saying I'm not you anymore. It's in fact being fully present and illuminating. Its life force energy, its light, comes from within, unfolds fully and strongly because there's no longer the old patterns to inhibit. There's no longer the old patterns shape the interaction with the environment. So this figure of resurrection is not a typical biblical figure. Maybe this is why other Christians that I've known have not wanted to display this in their house. In fact, the figure is sort of reminiscent of cartoon characters, you know, the genie from Aladdin and other strong, muscular, fiery beings. And that was intentional. I'm good with that in terms of symbolic meaning and interpretation. It's a very clear and direct message symbolically. And you notice that the resurrection figure has arms raised, muscular arms raised in a V for victory. Again, very direct, unapologetic, symbolic meaning. So victory over what? What is victory in this case? To me, in 2025, and maybe even in 1987, is not so much the triumph of the martyr, and it's not even the institutional triumph of the Christian church. It's okay to view it that way, but that's only one way. I think what this victory means to me is an unleashing of inner potential and inner dynamics. When I say inner, I don't mean solely personal. I mean relational and interconnected with the world and society, because that's a vital part of it. Because the old self was inhibiting, it was blocking, it was consuming resources, it was having us stuck into old patterns. And a good portion of our life energy goes into supporting and maintaining and defending and struggling with that identity, because that's all we know and that's all we believe. So what happens if we can release and let fully die all those inhibiting factors, all that battles that we fought to protect ourselves? We no longer need to protect that because it's gone. And we allow ourselves to surrender into and release into radical uncertainty, which includes possibilities of our worst fears, even things beyond our imagination, but also our best possibilities, even beyond our imagination. What flows out the other side? Could it be something completely vigorous, completely self-propelled, like an acorn sprouting into a sapling, growing into an oak tree? Who knows what seeds we have inside of us? Let the vigorous patterns unfold. So you notice that the resurrection figure is not blown around by or influenced by the swirling low-level clouds. They sort of swirl around it and uplift it. So there's a harmony, a deep harmony between the resurrection figure, this muscular figure of light. Really, it's the only light in the whole painting. Now I want to talk about the symbolism of the clouds at the top. So again, I'm kind of following a medieval or a Renaissance format in terms of the symbolic structure of the painting. So the clouds at the top are not very dimensional. Sort of a high cloud cover of cumulus clouds that are lit from below by the resurrection figure. You might view this as heaven. You might view this as the domain of God the Father. You might also view this as source. So the ground is utterly barren and one could say arid and dry. The whole thing takes place at night, dead of night, no one else around. So there's no sign of life on the ground. But these are dark, pregnant clouds. These are clouds that could unleash rain at any time. It could even be thunderstorm clouds. The resurrection figure rising up into them is engaging with the clouds. So there's the symbolism of the clouds is also recirculation, life-giving, washing away, cleansing, cleansing of wind, cleansing water, returning to source. I didn't feel like it was necessary to be very explicit about all of this symbolism, but when I first painted this in 1979, there was no cloud layer up the top. You know, the resurrection figure is reaching up, but reaching up into what? The clouds, I guess, represent the new world, the new environment that the reborn figure is going to inhabit. And it's different from the earthly land, the earthly home of the previous human form. And that's part of the radical uncertainty. You can't go back to the familiar land and live in the familiar ways when you're reborn this way. Certainly people who have born-again experiences in religion, mystical experiences, psychological releases, deep psychological healing experience this, including people who've been through addictions and abusive patterns. An essential part of being born again, reborn, resurrected, is entering a new world or seeing the world anew. Everything's new, everything's different. The old patterns are gone, the old you is gone, and it can take a while to adjust. So another important element of context for this video and this journey is what I'm going through right now in terms of my own death and rebirth. Broadly, I'm in late stages of a multi-year transformation process. Started at least 5 years ago. Moved to Tennessee during the pandemic to take care of my dad. And we had 5 good months together before he suddenly passed away of a stroke. I've gone through many shifts and changes. I'm now 68 years old, so there's some stage of life changes going on, career changes, relationship changes. But right now, and at the invitation of my dear friend who was going through her surgery, she invited all of her friends to think about what might need to die in our relationship and what we might need to release and how we might need to go through that as a ceremony. I knew I wanted to restore the painting as a ceremony while my friend was going through surgery and recovery. And I also saw this as an opportunity to let go of, to allow to die some identities and patterns around some of my core wounds, which predominantly involve shame. These are patterns I've held on to or inhabited my system for almost as long as I can remember, age 3 or so. I've coped and adapted to them in various ways. Some have been successful, some less so, but I feel called to step into the realm of shame and my experience of it and my holding of it and allow there to be a death. And I don't know if I'm going to use this stuff in the YouTube video, but I'll record it anyway. So what I'm holding now, or have been holding on to, is core wounds, which are obviously connected to my identity and my avoidance around those core wounds, that somehow I'm fundamentally broken. And if I don't do certain things the right way, if I don't get certain things done, if I find myself, well, the way I'd explain it if I was 3.5 was, if I misbehaved, even in little ways, then the full wrath of my parents, especially my mother, who was essentially like God at the time, could come down on me. The effect of, and maybe the goal of, annihilating me. So annihilating any resistance, shaming me so hard that whatever the offense was, it would never happen again. Making clear that my feelings and my needs didn't matter at all. In fact, to the degree that I got upset, this was even more reason for her to unleash her wrath and punishment upon me or my brothers, especially my older brother. This was a pattern of abuse. It had super powerful effect. Whenever in my mind I thought I was misbehaving. So misbehaving was, I didn't do my homework, or I didn't complete some school requirement, or I forgot to pay a bill, or any number of things, usually administrative, involving some rule system that I didn't necessarily agree to or like or found onerous. Not from a logical standpoint, believe me, but just from a childlike irritation perspective. So there would be some initial behavior that was sort of misbehaving, kind of neglectful often, not very conscious. But then my reaction to it would be very harsh, my internal critic. And then even before I could think, it would be this part of me that pushed it away as hard as I could, pushed it out of my mind, pushed it out of my awareness, pushed it out of my physical awareness. And of course, that reaction, I'm trying to avoid that harsh judging criticism, made things worse, because it would come back, the things wouldn't go away. Or even if that one thing did go away, something else would come along. And I developed rationalizations for this and beliefs about myself and the way the world should work, what I was justified in doing. So I'm speaking now into my teens and to my early 20s. Some level I knew this wasn't working. Actually, I knew on a lot of levels it wasn't working, but I couldn't get out of the bind and out of the patterns. And I tried to think my way out of it mostly. Did not have access to my body and to my emotions effectively. Did not feel like I had any support system to really talk about it, because if I would talk to anybody about it and be fully open about what was happening and what I was doing, I felt ridiculous, and I felt like I should be shamed, I should be laughed at, because what I'm doing is so stupid. So here's the capable, smart, mature part of me despising this other part of me. They're not working together. In fact, they're working at opposite purposes. I didn't have access to any way to resolve that, and it's played out in different ways over time and became ingrained patterns. Some things I got a grip on and established new behavior patterns. But even to the last few years, even to as recently as this year, some of those patterns were still there. And I found myself in a pattern of behavior which didn't feel good, and I thought was a way of coping with my internal stress, but wasn't. It kind of made things worse and led to ultimate humiliation, ending of a relationship, economic dislocation. And I caused it myself and felt really awful about it. I had a hard time believing, and still have a hard time believing, anybody could support me through this, anybody could love me through this, because it seems so unlovable. So go back to that 3.5-year-old who got spanked for not being able to stop crying. Cried uncontrollably for a half an hour. Cried so hard that my face hurt and my stomach hurt and my throat hurt. We called it being cry sick, which is a wonderful insight for a 3.5-year-old. So, what needs to die here? Is it the shamed being, the part of me that feels on the verge of oblivion, feels unloved and unlovable? So what I'm doing now as I walk is I'm just noticing and allowing the shame to be in my system. Be fully into my system and not halfway. And by talking out loud, it helps, gets all my system going. feel my fingertips. I think the walking helps. I'm walking at a slow, steady pace uphill. Recently, I've told a few people about all of this and allowed myself to be ridiculed and rejected and even more fully shamed. And it's been a mixed experience. It's been a mixed experience. And that's useful because nobody from the outside, be they professional or be they intimate friend or partner, can solve this. It's not theirs. It's in my being or my interrelational being. Well, they're participating in it, but they don't take it on or fix it or make it go away. I wonder what it would be like if I could go back to that 3.5-year-old who was crying uncontrollably and feeling like I was literally falling into an abyss. I was falling into death. And if I could just be with that 3.5-year-old all the way. Not to make it go away, not to make it hurt less, but to be present so that 3.5-year-old is not abandoned. That 3.5-year-old can feel that there's something larger holding him. That 3.5-year-old, in his own way, absolutely said, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" I think I've felt forsaken all my life in this core way. I had to hide this at all costs because if it ever came out, it would be too much and it would be obvious that I was unlovable. Body's way of making sense of all this. How could this have happened? It must be because we were unlovable. Because what we experienced couldn't have happened to somebody who was lovable, we tell ourselves. And what happens when that identity dies? What does death even mean to that identity? This feels like a good place to end the walking meditation. It may seem like I've left you on a cliffhanger, but in a way that seems appropriate. I'm still in the middle of this. Things are still unfolding. I don't know how it's going to come out. And we'll see what happens over the coming days. And I'll do another video that talks about the new home for the painting and that whole process and what it means. But I hope this meditation has been helpful for you. Thanks for everybody staying to the end. And I've really appreciated sharing all this time with you. Talk to you soon.